Good afternoon. May I welcome everyone to the 13th meeting in 2020 of the Delegated Powers and Law Reform Committee. We have apologies today from two of our members, Mary Fee and Gil Patterson, and can I again welcome Tom Arthur as a substitute member. The first item of business is to propose that the committee takes item 4 in private as it involves consideration of future reports. This report will be published when agreed. Does the committee agree to take item 4 in private?
Agreed.
Thank you. Before I turn to agenda item 2 to the instruments, I'd like to add something about the 28-day rule. As regular followers of this committee will know, there is a requirement that at least 28 days should elapse between the laying of an instrument and which is subject to the negative procedure and the coming into force of that instrument. The Scottish Government can bring an instrument into force sooner than this, but must accompany the SSI with a letter to the presiding officer explaining the reason for breaching the 28-day rule. While acknowledging that we are in difficult and challenging times and legislation may be required which is unable to meet the 28-day requirement, I wish to emphasise that the committee will still be carefully scrutinising the reasons given by the Scottish Government for failing to comply with this. The 28-day rule offers protection of the Parliament's scrutiny function by allowing time for appropriate scrutiny of would-be law. This rule should only be breached when absolutely necessary. Now, turning to instruments subject to the negative procedure, the first is the Council Tax Reduction Scotland Amendment No. 3, Coronavirus Regulations 2020, SSI 2020-108. This instrument increases the amount of earnings that are to be disregarded in calculating the income of an applicant for the purposes of an award of council tax reduction. The instrument was laid before the Parliament on 1 April 2020 and came into force on 6 April 2020. This clearly breaches the 28-day rule. The committee is required under standing orders to draw the instrument to the attention of the Parliament under reporting ground J for failing to comply with the requirements of section 28(2) of the Interpretation and Legislative Reform Scotland Act 2020. Does the committee therefore wish to draw this instrument to the attention of the Parliament under reporting ground J? Great. Okay. The Scottish Government's reasons for the breach, which in this case are set out in a letter to the presiding officer dated 1 April 2020. It explains that the instrument was made in response to a UK Government announcement on 20 March about increasing the basic rate of working tax credit as part of its response to COVID-19. The Scottish Government states that these amending regulations could not be finalised until sufficient detail of the implementation of the UK Government's announcement was known. The instrument then had to be brought into force quickly to reflect the UK Government's timing. Is the committee content with the reasons given for the failure to comply with section 28(2)? Finally, on this instrument, members will have seen correspondence between the committee and the Minister for Parliamentary Business and Veterans on a previous set of council tax reduction regulations. These are indeed the latest in a long line of letters on the need to consolidate these regulations. I'm grateful for the Minister's latest update. While I appreciate government resources are currently being put to more pressing needs, I would propose that I respond to the Minister to let him know we are still keen to see a consolidation exercise in the near future. Would the committee agree to me writing such a letter as convener? Okay, thank you. Carers Allowance, Coronavirus Breaks in Care, Scotland, Regulations 2020, SSI 2020-117. This instrument relaxes the eligibility criteria for carers allowance to take account of the effects of coronavirus. The instrument was laid before Parliament on 1 April 2020 and came into force on 2 April 2020. This also does not respect the requirement that at least 28 days should elapse between the laying of an instrument, which is subject to the negative procedure, and the coming into force of that instrument. Therefore, as with the previous instrument, the committee is required to draw the instrument to the attention of the Parliament under reporting ground J for failing to comply with the requirements of section 28(2). Does the committee therefore wish to draw this instrument to the attention of Parliament under reporting ground J? Great. The reasons in this case are set out in a letter to the presiding officer dated 2 April 2020. It explains that the changes made in these regulations would ease pressures on carers throughout the UK in response to the effects of coronavirus. The Scottish Government therefore wished to make this change as quickly as possible. The response also indicates that this is in line with the corresponding change in England and Wales. Is the committee content with the reasons given for the failure to comply with section 28.2? Content, thank you. Prisoners and Young Offenders Institutions Scotland Amendment Rules 2020 SSI 2020-122. This instrument makes amendments to the Prison and Young Offenders Institutions Scotland Rules 2011 to provide governors with flexibility with regard to compliance with timescales and the provision of certain services which are not deemed to be critical to the security and health of Scottish Prison Service staff and prisoners during the coronavirus outbreak. The instrument was laid before Parliament on 7 April 2020 and came into force immediately. This again breaches the 28-day rule. The committee is therefore required to draw the instrument to the attention of the Parliament under reporting ground J for failing, for failing to comply with the requirements of section 28.2. Does the committee therefore wish to draw this instrument to the attention of the Parliament under reporting ground J? The reasons for the breach in this case are set out in a letter to the presiding officer dated 7 April 2020. It explains that these changes to the prison rules were required quickly in order to give the prison service the flexibility it needs to manage the rapidly evolving position with respect to COVID-19 and ensure the safe and humane operation of prisons which are currently under exceptional pressures. Is the committee content with the reasons given for the failure to comply with section 28.2? Electricity Works Miscellaneous Temporary Modifications Coronavirus Scotland Regulations 2020 SSI 2020-123. This instrument temporarily alters various regulations to remove requirements that documents and information be physically available and instead requires them to be electronically available to allow people to follow current social distancing requirements. The instrument was laid before the Parliament on 14 April 2020 and comes into force on 24 April 2020. Again, this breaches the 28-day rule. The committee is therefore required under standing orders to draw the instrument to the attention of the Parliament under reporting ground J for failing to comply with the requirements of section 28.2 of the Interpretation and Legislative Reform Scotland Act 2010. Does the committee therefore wish to draw this instrument to the attention of the Parliament under reporting ground J? Great. The reasons for the breach in this case are set out in a letter dated 14 April 2020. It explains that the changes made by the regulations allow for documents that previously had to be physically available to be electronically available, instead to allow people to follow social distancing instructions. It was considered necessary to bring these modifications into force as early as possible. The letter states that this will support future economic and societal recovery, will ensure consistency of approach across the planning system and thus certainty for developers and the public, and will maintain the ability of the Energy Consents Unit to continue to process applications efficiently. Is the committee content with the reason with the reasons given for the failure to comply with section 28.2? No points have been raised on SSI 2020-120. Is the committee content with this instrument? Okay. Agenda item 3 is consideration of instruments subject to no procedure. No points have been raised on SSIs 2020-93, 107, 119 and 121. However, members will recall that when we last met, we agreed to write to the Lord President to ask whether there would be a time limit on the operation of SSI 2020-93. Members will have seen the Lord President's interesting response in which he says that there is currently no time limit as the act of a journal may be, quote, of utility beyond the end of the pandemic and its operational recovery period, close quotes. I would propose that I would write to the Lord President to thank him for this update, and that we also highlight our correspondence with the lead committee, in this case the Justice Committee, for its interest and information. Are members agreed? Agreed. Okay. Is the committee content with these instruments? Content. Okay. Thank you. I now move the meeting into private.